Hey, it is time to review natural selection. So here's Charles Darwin. This is an image of him sketching what he saw on the Galapagos Islands. So what Darwin saw when he was a young man was several animal species and plant species that were very well adapted to their environment. So he thought, this probably isn't random. There has to be something going on here that makes these organisms specifically well adapted to their environment. And he noticed color, the size, the shape of the beak, and for the finches in particular, he noticed that the shape of the beak was specifically well adapted for what they ate. So the finches, there are several species of finches that live on the Galapagos Islands. And one thing that happened well after Darwin's time was the beak depth actually changed in these finches due to a drought that happened in 1978. So, first of all, the average beak depth you can see in these finches in 1976 before the drought was about 9.3 millimeters, and there were 750 finches. Well, after the drought, there were only 90 survivors, but those that survived had an average beak depth of over 10 millimeters. So what does that mean? That means that something had to change in their environment to drive this change in their physical appearance. So when there's a drought, that changed what they were able to eat, okay? So the drought made their seeds have a much harder coat. Okay, so they would need a much deeper beak to be able to break open the seed and feed on it. Those that had a shallower beak, they weren't able to eat those seeds, and since they couldn't eat, they died out. So then over time, what they would see after these 1978 survivors reproduced, you would see a lot of finches that had a much deeper beak depth. So here's how the process works. The finches, they didn't just say, oh, hey, I want to eat that seed so I want to grow my beak. As you can see in the graph, there was some variation, okay, in the depth of the beak to begin with. So this is in the DNA of the organism. They do have to have some variation. So in this example, we've got deer, and they have different colors and sizes based on their DNA. So every species makes more offspring than can actually survive. So in animals, they have a lot of offspring. A lot of them die because they can't eat. A lot of them are hunted, and their traits along with them actually die off as well. So the ones that are able to survive, they are the ones that are going to be passing on their DNA. Now, this part, selection, this can have to do with eating food. It can have to do with avoiding predators. Anything that allows them to survive in contrast to the other members of their species. So finally, what you're going to see is these guys that are able to survive, they're going to be the ones that reproduce. So initially we had only a few of these darker brown deer and some light brown ones. The ones that were lighter brown, it seemed they died out in this environment. And we had more darker brown ones, and those were the ones that were able to reproduce. Okay, so it could have been in this environment the darker brown was a thicker fur, and it allowed them to survive the cold. And then the ones with a thinner coat, which were lighter brown, they died because they weren't able to survive because it was too cold. Here's another really good example of natural selection that happens. So there are two variations of these what are known as snowshoe hares that live up in anywhere that there is snow, like Alaska, Canada, anywhere cold. So So there's a brown variety and there's a white variety. And of course, bunnies reproduce. So we're going to have a lot of brown ones and a lot of white ones. Well, let's say that year happens to be very snowy. Okay, the ones that are white are going to be blending in with the environment, and predators aren't going to be able to see them because they're blending in with the snow. If that year happened to not be snowy, then we would probably see a lot more brown hares survive. So since the white ones were able to survive because they were able to blend in, they were able to eat, they were able to reproduce and pass on their DNA, we say this is survival of the fittest. So over time, in this environment, you would see more of the white-colored hares because the brown ones, their darker color, is easier for predators to see and eat them. Predators like owls and eagles and other things that eat rabbits. The end.